Today's program, featuring Regina Huerter and two of her teammates, is an important, and timely presentation about the ongoing work that she is leading to enable our youth to choose a life that is meaningful and successful, not a dead-end life of underachievement and crime. I was introduced and heard Regina speak about a comprehensive gang initiative last year at the Denver Foundation. The Denver Foundation selected this initiative by pledging to raise and give $100,000 a year to support this program for 5 years. This makes this a major commitment by one of our leading community foundations who responded to a request from local leaders on pressing issues facing the community. Now, because we want to give her the time that she needs to have for this presentation, I will just tell you that she's had responsibilities in this area for 27 years in criminal justice, and she's a nationally known and appreciated leader. Regina.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you. So I'm going to, and I just have to say, thanks to Lee and Eclectics, we were able to create a DVD last year around gang stuff, and it's just been wonderful to have that, to be able to take out to communities. Brought along also with me today, Johnny Williams and Johnny Santos, and they will be talking with you in a moment. I'm going to direct your attention down here to this slide presentation. And I'm going to fly through some of these slides, but I wanted to give you a little bit of a taste of the culture, because what you usually hear about with gangs is about just the violence. But there's a whole lot of reasons why the culture operates the way that it does. I'm not going to actually read all these different slides. A lot of them are just going to be visual. This particular one is one of my favorites, though, that talks about your son has shot its teacher, escaped in a stolen car, ran a blockade, took hostages, burned down an orphanage, and wounded 3 police officers in a shootout. And mom is saying, is that any reason to treat him like a common criminal? And I can tell you in this day and working, I have been working with offenders for many, many years, and we often hear that as, you know, well, it's not all that bad. And what we know when we're talking about gang stuff is that it impacts all of us at different levels. And for some of you, you may say, I have never met someone involved in a gang. But if you live and work downtown here, you've been impacted by gangs. And I guarantee you, when we talk a little bit further about cost, is that I have to thank all of you. I have to thank all of you, because at some point, all of you have paid for the criminal justice process, have paid for the hospital bills, have paid for the rehab, have paid for the burials of somebody impacted by gangs, either by the person involved themselves or their victim. So all of us are impacted by this particular issue. So we know a lot about what leads people to getting into gangs, and it's these big 6 things. And they're all very intuitive, and it starts with the family. So it starts with the family and family's inability to manage and self-regulate and to be able to have some level of supervision. And a lot of times that is around parents get too involved in their own stuff and forget that their primary job is to raise their children. And then what we see is this early onset of childhood aggression. And so programs like the Conflict Center and those types of programs that teach skills how to do things other than using their fists are really important for us. And then you start seeing this negative life events. And that could be the loss of a grandfather. So I invite you to think back to when you were a little kid and what really was important to you. And oftentimes it was people in your life. And when there's a negative life event that takes place, that somebody was significant to you, or you moved and were pulled away from all your friends, that has a tremendous impact on us. And we take that often for granted when we're looking at our children. What we know by research is that it has a profound effect. Then we start seeing this delinquent belief system. So imagine those first 3 that you're a younger child, and now you're getting into this kind of peer group, 10, 11, 12 years of age, and you're starting to break away from just being under your family's control, but having some more free time out. And you've got this kind of aggression, which usually means you're kind of hard to be around. Hot-tempered people tend to be very difficult. A lot of times to be around, you've got that kind of loss and grief stuff, there's a lot of anger going on, you don't have the family support, and you start looking at your delinquent peer systems, and you start having delinquent behaviors, and probably the worst part of that is that those delinquent behaviors are reinforced. And it's often that reinforcement that starts to say, this is okay behaviors for me to do. And so then we start seeing this kind of commitment to the street-oriented peers, and then lastly, really getting into the gang system itself. And so what's important to recognize here is that we have opportunities to stop this progression. And what we really know about gang stuff is that for kids who end up in gangs, it's that they don't have other viable alternatives. We can stop kids just at delinquency without really getting into that gang system. We can stop kids by helping to deal with loss and grief issues. We can work with kids to teach them how to manage their aggression. And we can stop that trajectory. We can help create healthier families. So my message to you is that gang systems and gang involvement is preventable. If you just look at the bolded items on here, safety, structure, relationships, belonging, social norms, efficacy and mattering, skill building and integration, I should say, that those particular items are things that we know are important in normative adolescent development. They also work if you're involved in a gang. You can find all of those things in a gang system. So again, just trying to anchor that what's going on with kids getting involved in gangs isn't because there's some foreign entity that came in and invaded our children. It's because we've been, in my opinion, neglectful in how we're actually raising our children and not paying attention to what their actual needs are. So why do youth join a gang? They're born into it. We are now in third and fourth generation gang members. That means grandparents are involved in gangs. So when we talk about having a child leave a gang, we're actually talking about them leaving their family. That's a very difficult thing to ask somebody to do because it's a neighborhood norm, and we most certainly know across the city and across the United States there are certain places that have a larger percentage of gang systems, and I'll share a little bit more on that later on. The power, prestige, and protection, and partying, meeting basic needs. For some kids, it gives them a place to stay. It's food in their mouths because the gang system's taking care of them. It is the money, and a big part of it's become money, and the money is always about drugs. So you always equate those two things together. It's cool. If I want to be in the in crowd, this is the group that has the power. I want to be a part of that particular group. The structure that it brings to kids' lives, a lot of our kids are lacking structure, and they need to have structure. And the gang system helps create those rules in that way to manage themselves. Purpose, place, and belonging and validation, I would argue that that's something we all seek. And in the gang system, they find it. And that they are somebody, they're significant, and it's about their identity. And you see this young man as the background on this with his tattoos. When you think about identity, he is telling us loud and clear, in our face, this is who I am. I am a part of a gang system, and this is how I want you to see me. And then respect, revenge, reputation. From the law enforcement perspective, there's not a universal definition of a gang, but this is what the common elements are across the country. That it's a group of individuals with common interests or bonds and activities that are characterized by criminal behavior. That's what separates it, from being a part of a Boy Scout troop. And that it's engaged in either collectively or individually. So that's the common definition that we see. What we see is some trends and issues across the country is gang migration. So we see what we call West Coast gangs, so like the Sureños and the Crips and the Bloods. We now see them in the East Coast. We see the folk and people nations from the Midwest and the East Coast coming across the country. We have a lot of hybrid gangs where they're calling themselves folk, but they're mixing stuff up with Crip stuff, and vice versa. We also see a lot of national gang systems such as Mara Salvatrucha on 18th Street that are coming across the country and impacting all different kinds of communities. So the migration is a big issue. We have them documented in all different types of communities. A lot of times people think about the city like a city Denver size as the place where you're going to find most of the gangs. And in fact, the fastest growing populations are actually in communities under 25,000. We have huge narcotics trafficking, and what I look at over the years of development in Denver is that I call it the bifurcated system, where we now have these kids coming up again and doing the typical kind of street gang stuff, but we have a very high form of drug trafficking that's taking place. And so when you see and hear about these major kind of busts, it's those high form of drug trafficking.